A number of months ago, I made a bar of American flag pattern Damascus. Today we're going to use some of that bar and incorporate it into this knife, which I call the Stars and Stripes Bowie. Starting off here, we got a stack of strips of 15 and 20 and 1084. These are both high carbon steels. The 15 and 20 has some added nickel, so it stays shiny in the finished knife, and the 1084 has extra manganese, so that will become the dark layer. We're going to put this billet in the fire. Let's pull it out and set the welds on the power hammer. Power hammer makes it look easy. Right here we're tapping in these corners, and that is bending the layers into somewhat of a C shape or parentheses shape. And once we've forged in those corners, we're going to forge it square again, and we're going to forge it flat, and we're going to draw out the bar. We like to have a good long bar so that we can cut a number of strips off. Let that cool nice and slow. And then we're going to clean up this bar. Make sure it's nice and clean on the sides that meet. And we're going to mark out 7 lines. We're going to slice these pieces off with the bandsaw. And here's some of that American flag pattern that I was talking about. 50 stars and 13 stripes. I forged this in an earlier video, my first video on this channel. Go watch it if that's interesting for you. So we're just going to slice off this piece, and we're going to make a stack here. So we got 4 pieces on the bottom, the American flag, then on top of that, and then the other 3 pieces on top. We're going to weld this billet together. We're going to put it in the forge now, let it come up to temperature. It needs to be good and hot. Good forge welding temperature. You can always tell if it's hot enough if there's a certain amount of steam comes off the billet. This just takes practice to be able to see. We're drawing out this billet. Nice and thin, nice and long. We're going to let that cool. Cool it nice and slow so it doesn't get too hard. Here's a little test etch of this billet. And that looks really nice. Let's clean it up. Again, making sure that all the contacting sides are very clean. Slicing off these slices. These were just over 1 inch long. I'm making a couple billets out of these, so we're going to each have 2 stacks of 7. We're going to weld these shut on the sides and put it in the forge. Make sure the forge is good and hot at this stage, because it's a pretty tall, narrow billet to forge weld. To ensure a good forge weld, make sure you forge in the corners too. You see how I'm rocking it there? This just ensures that I have a good bit of pressure on every corner. Let's just grind those welds off. It's easy to do now when the billet is red hot. A shower of sparks comes off. Actually, we're going to cut off that handle too. And we're going to put it on the end. So we want to draw this billet out lengthwise. So we set the welds. And we're going to draw it out lengthwise. Make sure it's good and hot so that you don't have to worry about anything opening up. If you set your welds well, then you won't have to worry about things opening up. That's always a good precautionary step to make sure that it's good and hot when you forge it. The power hammer really makes this easy, this step. I'm here drawing out the tang. The tang is the part that will go inside the handle. making it narrow and long. Make sure I have an even thickness over my whole billet. Well, we've left the billets a little thick here. That's because we have to do one more step before we're finished forging this. And that is we're going to cut this point off. And what this will allow us to do is we're just going to forge that tip. You can see that here. We're going to forge that tip towards the spine of the knife. This will allow the flags to curve up around the edge and up into the spine of the knife. It'll give a little bit more movement. Just be gentle at this stage and make sure the steel is good and hot. We're going to draw it out to the finished thickness now. And we're going to let it cool here. Afterwards, we went into the kiln. It normalized, refined, and annealed. And then we're going to surface grind. So now the knife is dead soft. It is not hardened yet. Just very soft. The grain is looking really nice. And we're ready to do a bunch of work on it. Here's the test etch. Flags look good and they curve up into the tip nicely. We're just going to draw in this clip here, the clip point. It's going to have a false edge ground on it. Just going to refine those lines here. The belt grinder makes it easy. I'm going to clamp on this big Mert file guide. Bjorn from Nordic Edge sent me this a few weeks ago, and I'm very thankful for it. It is a fantastic file guide with screw-on carbides. I will clamp this in my milling vise, nice and snug, and we're going to mill a relief behind the shoulder of the knife. Make sure I come up right up against that carbide. And then with a file, I'm going to make sure that those shoulders are nice and square. But the rest of the tang is still a little thicker, so we're going to clamp this on the surface grinder and surface grind the tang to the nice perfect thickness. Now we're going to start working on the fittings here. Using some bronze, we're going to cut off the guard material and then we'll mill in this slot. The slot width is exactly 172 thousandths of an inch. And I'm going to tap that on, make sure it goes all the way so it's nice and snug. And now we're going to do a front spacer, also out of bronze. And we'll tap that on too. That looks great together. Later on, I will be adding some stainless spacers in between here. Let's select some handle material. Right away, this piece of bog oak sprung out at me. I will be using this today. This bog oak came from the Muskoka turner up in Canada. He stabilized it very well, too. Now it's time to put the gold logo in. We're going to be engraving first with my fiber laser. And then using my Lindsay foot control, we're going to cut all these little notches in the bottom of the letters and the leaf. And kind of dovetail the sides. Really making sure that there's enough dovetails so that the gold can get underneath everything and get stuck in there for life. Once it's pressed in, we're going to sand that off, all the excess. And we're going to paint the knife with Condorsal. Condorsal is an anti-scaling compound. When we go into heat treatment, the whole knife would otherwise turn black from decarburization. This can make your etch look funny in the finished knife, and because the ricasso, or like the area in front of the guard, it is to finished dimension, we don't want any funny stuff happening there. The rest of the blade is fine because we're going to be grinding it yet. Just sanding that clean. We're going to bend this tang down a little. It was a little bit straight, which is fine, but we'll just bend that down. Going to start cutting our block to shape and size. Making sure everything is good and flat and good and square. If you know that everything is square, stuff won't be bent or out of whack. We're going to mark out where we're going to have our tang threads. For an 8x32 thread, this rod on the end needs to be 160 thousandths of an inch. Now that I've cut those threads, time to mark out where the tang is on the block. I'm going to mill out the slot in the center of the block. Using this extended shaft burr, I'm going to just clean up the inside, make sure everything's nice and smooth there. And it fits on real nice. Here we are putting these little stainless spacers in, like I'd mentioned. And we're going to start working on the butt cap. Butt cap will also have a stainless spacer in front of it. Let's go for a quick assemble, see how everything looks. Well, everything went together well. That means it's now time to bed the tang. I will be coating all the parts that I don't want the glue to stick to with Vaseline. I'm going to fill up my handle with the C Corp epoxy. It's a 30-minute epoxy. And 35 minutes later, I check if it's tacky. It needs to be just not tacky anymore. Then you can pull everything apart. Now I'm drilling some alignment pinholes in these spacers. Also in the back side, so the back stainless spacer. This has little pins that goes into the handle. Now we're going to surface grind both sides of the handle so that we know that everything is square and centered to each other. Let's do a little bit of work on this front spacer. And we'll begin to profile our handle. Start making this big square chunky block look a little bit more like a knife handle. This is always a fun part. This bog oak has really nice consistent grain. Very excited to use it. The back spacer is rounded and to shape. Now the front spacer, I'll do the same thing. And I rounded off these little stainless spacers. And I'm going to put a fuller in this front bronze spacer. This is done on my belt grinder again. Cleaned up using this Scotch-Brite wheel. That looks super pretty together. Now we're going to mark out on the handle around the fittings. This is so we can start shaping the handle, and we don't really want to go too far into the pencil line. A little ways. We want the same amount of pencil sticking out around the entire handle. And we're going to start rounding everything off, blending the front to the back. Plus some additional carving on it. We do want to make sure that it is very comfortable in the hand. This belt here is called a scalloped belt. It really helps for contouring the handle and making it shape really nice. I have this little jig I made to hold my butt caps. This way I can work on the butt cap without burning my fingers or actually grinding my fingers. And rounding it off nicely. Now it's time to move to the front guard. So the guard is going to be embellished kind of nicely. It's going to have some nice carvings and nice curves. You know, I use my belt grinder a lot. I bought this belt grinder in 2020 on Christmas Eve. My friend Rad from RDT Grinders has built this. He lives in Brampton, Ontario. He built this grinder, and it is my most used and most versatile tool in my shop. Let's begin the blade grinding. First off, we're going to do the pre-bevel. So this is just a 15-degree angle on the very edge of the knife. And then we're going to move into the flat grinding. Because we're grinding so much material off, it's good to keep that edge off the grinder while we're grinding the bulk off. That'll keep the edge cool and still well tempered. This took me 15 minutes to grind. That took a little bit. After grinding, I move to my waterfall platen, and I make sure that those little plunge lines are very neat and tidy. The first time I saw a waterfall platen, it was done by Kyle Royer. Let's begin hand sanding the blade. I started this side, and then my wife came in. She said she wanted to hand sand for me. So, of course, I'm very happy about that, because I have other things I can be doing too. Look at her. They're very handy. This is why you should get married. Alright, all the components are to size, shape, and dimension. But we still have to etch the blade, and we want to polish all the fittings. To etch the blade, we're going to first begin by washing and really good cleaning that blade. Make sure it's really good and clean. If there's any fat spots on it, you will see that in the etch. Let's pull it out of the acid here. Using some very fine sandpaper, we're going to just sand the highlights. Remember, the shiny steel has the extra nickel in it. That's why it's resisting this acid. Once I have reached a certain depth that I like to then sand it very high. So I sand it to 1500 or 2000 grit. And we're going to start polishing all the pieces. Polish that back spacer. I actually thinned down that back spacer. It was thicker before, but I like the thinner look. Going to polish that guard, make sure everything's good and shiny. And we're going to make the tang nut here. And let's polish the blade. My buffing attachment was also made by Rad. It is fantastic. We put so many attachments in my grinder. There's my smiley face. We're going to give some finish sanding to the handle. This is some 1200 grit sandpaper, and we're going to give it a buff. That's the beautiful part about having stabilized wood, is you can polish it so it can become nice and shiny. Alright, so now we're going to antique the fittings. So we're using some brass black. These are bronze fittings, but brass black works good for most non-ferrous metals, even ferrous metals, to give it that real black look. But I'm going to scrub it good so that it's not quite black, but it has this antique look. And I had put my knife in the coffee etch, which is finished now. We're going to blast some heat from the heat gun on it. And we're going to spritz some oil on it. This is G96 gun oil. It's my favorite oil. And the knife is finished. Finished for now. It is off to the sheath maker, Buffalo Bones. He will be making the sheath for this. He's one of the best sheath makers in the entire world. I'm really lucky to be able to work with him. The pattern turned out really nice. The flags look so natural. There are 5 flags on this blade. The antique bronze fittings look really nice. Along with those little stainless spacers. I'm glad I did add those later. The bog oak is so clean and dark. And you can see the 5-point stars on the flags. Thanks for watching again. I really do appreciate you guys sticking around with me and watching these videos. I'm super thankful that you guys like my stuff, and I will see you on the next video.